items. If we look under, there was the the dispute about the new F. If we can just, it's in the blues, but if we can all agree, we'll take out the word new from the original or the motion and the amendment. And then under H, that the committee calls for the government to, you see the word immediately struck out. There's some dispute whether that should been struck out or not. I'm just looking for that we can agree that we leave that word in for the purposes of the motion and the amendment. If we're fine with that, everyone? Wonderful. So be it. Oh.
Immediately and
That the committee calls on the government to, and then the word, you see the word immediately is struck out. We believe that was struck out somewhere along the lines, perhaps an error. So to seek clarification, we're just saying to leave it as to unstrike the strike. So to leave the word immediately in, so to immediately continue to work. So if we're fine on that, please.
I was going to say unstriking the strike sounds quite anti-labor, and I don't know if it's consistent with
Well,
Mr.
I don't think
Massey's
C-58's passed yet, so I think we can still use that language. But anyways, I'll take that as everyone's in agreement. Thank you very much. You have the floor, Mr.
Replacement word for that.
I don't know how to unstrike strike in South Korean, so why don't you?
I'm so confused. Are we striking out what we initially agreed to immediately?
There was. You mean right now?
Well,
I don't think there was an agreement.
I think we just
anywhere in
agreed
the
to
motion.
return to Mr. Perkins' motion. Is that
So
right?
we're just returning it to the original.
Did I follow?
Yeah, let me finish. If you're not in agreement, then let's move on, okay? Okay, we don't have consent. Let's just continue. New F is still in there, and so is, and the word immediately is.
So the word
Still
new is
struck
still
out.
in before F, and the
I'll add you to the speaking list, Ms. Vignola.
is the word immediately still on strike, or
Go ahead.
It's on
the floor is
strike, okay.
yours, Mr. Genovese.
Ça fait bon 2-3 minutes. Ça fait un
So for 2 or 3 minutes, people have been speaking at the same time, and so the interpreters can't provide me with the information. I can't follow the details of the conversation, therefore. Put yourselves in my place. If you had 10 or so francophones around you, and especially Quebecers, because apparently we speak really quickly, you would find it difficult to follow even if you're bilingual, and that's what is happening. And I would appreciate very much not being excluded from the conversation because everyone is speaking at once. Thank you.
There was a bit of joking back and forth, but let's stick to whoever has the floor, and we'll ensure that we can all participate properly. Mr. Genovese, you have the floor on your amendment to Mr. Massey's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sadly, here we go again. Conservatives have been trying to get the contracts publicly released so that the people who paid for these contracts can see them. And we saw some shifting in position, sadly, of one party in particular around this table that has changed the dynamic, and Conservatives are going to continue to fight for the release of these contracts. Here's the situation. We have over $40 billion in public subsidies planned for various companies. Over $40 billion. That is about $3,000 per Canadian family. That's a very significant amount of money per Canadian family, as I know many families are struggling as a result of the affordability crisis. Food prices are up, rent is up, housing costs are up, defaults are up, hunger is up. There are so many challenges facing our country. And while Canadians are pinching pennies, especially this time of year, the government has made decisions around very significant subsidies to companies to the tune of $3,000 per Canadian family. So Canadians have a right to know what they are getting in return for those subsidies. And what we hear from the Liberals on this is an insistence on praising the deals, and yet an insistence on not showing the details of their work. They want Canadian workers to believe that these are great deals, and yet the Canadian workers can't see them. What we hear from Liberals is that essentially this is the best deal you've never seen, and we're saying, well, if it's a good deal, show it to the people who are supposed to benefit from it, so that they can make up their own minds, so that the public can decide whether or not they think that they should be each on the hook for $3,000 and what the corresponding benefits are associated with these expenditures. If these are good deals, then let people see them. And for hours and hours on end, members across the way have said, these are good deals, these are great deals, these are investments in people, these are fantastic deals, the best deals you've ever seen. Well, you've never seen, actually. These are the best deals you could imagine. Well, you'll have to imagine them because you don't get to know what they are. The best deals you can imagine, and that's all you'll be able to do, is the approach that our colleagues opposite want to take to this. And this kind of bluster about the glory of something that can't be seen is bizarre. I think it's unprecedented that they would be so shameless in making claims on the one hand about the quality of their work, and on the other hand about the necessity of keeping that work completely invisible. We have taken a clear, principled position saying that these deals should be subject to democratic scrutiny by the people who are looking at them. That those who are supposed to be the shareholders, in effect, for this deal, those that are putting the money into this deal, should get to see what is in the deal. Are there protections for workers in these deals? Did, in the process of negotiating the handover of $40 billion plus, $3,000 per Canadian family, did the government think to include provisions that would provide protections for Canadian workers, that would definitively ensure that a certain number of jobs are being created in Canada? Did the government think to do that? Or did they forget? Was it a matter of incompetent oversight, or was it a matter of indifference? Did they include those provisions? Did they intend to not include those provisions? Did they have ill intention towards workers? Were they simply capricious in their disregard for Canadian workers? Did they just say, well, who cares? We don't need it. What was on their mind? What's in this deal? We don't know. As far as they would like to have it, we'll never know. And Mr. Speaker, I'm inclined. Call me a skeptic, Mr. Speaker. You know, I want to be hopeful, especially this time of year. But as a father of 5 children, experience teaches me that when somebody wants to hide something, maybe there's a reason for it, right? Right? When one of my kids says, "Don't look at that. Don't go in that room," right? I can tell you the first thing I'm going to do is want to know what's going on. Any parent of young children has probably had that experience where you're used to a noisy household, and then all of a sudden you think, it seems a little too quiet. I wonder what's going on. Well, members across the way who may have similar experience, I think will have to acknowledge that that they're acting a little bit guilty here. That they're acting a little bit like there are things they want to hide in these contracts. And hey, I invite them to prove me wrong. I invite them to come clean with Canadians. You know, a prime minister of this country once said, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant." I think that was the current prime minister said that, in fact. Yeah. Soon to be former, but for now, the current prime minister said sunlight is the best disinfectant. So let's disinfect this suspicion that is hanging over our colleagues opposite. And let's give the good people of Windsor the chance to know the truth, Mr. Speaker. We've heard from MPs from the Windsor area and elsewhere saying, the best deal you could possibly imagine, but that's where it's going to stay, in your imagination. The best deal you've never seen. And we're saying, show your work. Let the taxpayers, let the workers, let the voters know what's in these deals. And then sadly, we started with a situation in which all of the opposition parties were on board with that principle. We had, in fact, the NDP leader standing up in the House of Commons calling for the release of these contracts. And then we had agreement from all three opposition parties in this committee to support the release of these contracts. And then we had a feeble filibuster for a short period of time from the Liberals who wanted to keep these contracts secret. And we're going on and on talking about how great a deal it was, but in the process of talking about how allegedly great a deal it was, they were filibustering to prevent the release of this information. And then I was extremely disappointed to see the NDP, just with a little bit of Liberal pressure, buckle under that pressure from their costly, corrupt, cover-up coalition compadres. They changed their position. First, they had called for the release of these contracts, and then in a fiery fury of flip-flopping, and that's the end of the alliteration, they switched sides and voted with the government to kill our motion to order the production of these contracts. And I think that was a sad betrayal of Canadian workers by the NDP. The NDP likes to claim that it's the party of Canadian workers. And yet we've seen repeatedly, again today, a sad betrayal by the NDP of workers. The NDP is now a shadow of its former self, and it's become a shadow of the Liberal Party. And one of the Liberal members, in fact, said in the House yesterday that the NDP are in their pocket. Well, it's sad but true. We've got now two parties of government. We've got the Liberals, and to be fair to the Liberals, they've at least been consistent on it. You know, they've been the party of cover-ups for decades at least, right? That's their brand. They're the party of corruption and cover-ups. That's what they do. They don't quite put it on the sign, but pretty close, right? And but the NDP, they have sold the farm and fully joined with this tragic coalition. Tragic for Canadians that is trying to hide important information from Canadian taxpayers. So here we are. So they defeated our motion and then put forward their own motion. Now, this motion that the NDP put forward initially, I must say, Mr. Speaker, it is, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair, this is one of the most bizarre motions that I've ever seen come before a committee. The NDP, I think, in the midst of caving to their coalition colleagues, they wanted to still put some window dressing out there for workers. So they put forward a motion that effectively says that they're going to use the ATIP process. So it seems that some NDP MPs could simply be replaced by a $5 bill, because that's all it costs to file an ATIP is $5. We don't need a parliamentary committee to file an ATIP. Any citizen, any person from Windsor or any other part of the country can take $5 and can go file an ATIP. Now, under this government, the ATIP process has become severely challenged. Under this government, you get massive delays and horrific redactions that prevent you from knowing anything useful if you file an ATIP. So, you get your money's worth for that $5. But that's the ATIP process. My colleague, Mr. Perkins, is saying you don't get your money for $5. Well, keep in mind inflation. Just inflation. That $5 doesn't buy as much as it used to, right? And it's true with ATIP as well. Before just inflation, you could actually get some information for $5, but now you can't. But anyways, there's this ATIP process where Canadians can, for $5, file an access to information request. And my colleague from the NDP says, let's, as a parliamentary committee, do what any Canadian can do and file an ATIP. And okay, he's got some other language in there about ensuring that some specific information is included. Frankly, I think there's some procedural problems around the information they're asking for in terms of whether it will actually come up. The procedural problem is that committees have an unfettered right to order the production of existing documents. They cannot order somebody or some entity to create documents which do not exist, right? So committees can order copies of all my love letters to my wife, but it cannot order me to write love letters to my wife, to use a somewhat absurd analogy. So committees can order documents that exist. They cannot order someone to produce documents. So I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding in terms of this motion, in terms of whether it orders the production of existing documents or whether it orders the creation of documents. So I would like to think we can order the transfer of that information, but I actually suspect that if this motion were to pass, we would in some cases not get the information we wanted because the entities in question would come back and say, well, we're not producing documents that don't exist. We're only complying with the committee's orders insofar as they involve providing existing documents. So I think in that regard there was a little bit more heat than light, let's say, in the motion that's been put forward. The basic substantive core of this motion is $5 ATIP. So maybe the committee can save some Canadian the $5 fee, right? Or maybe we could just pass the hat and have everybody throw a nickel in and get this stuff. But this is not the serious work of a parliamentary committee, Chair, quite obviously. Parliamentary committees, unlike private citizens, have the right to request access to any document unredacted. And so we have taken the position that parliamentary committees, this committee, should use the power that it has to order the production of these documents. We've got over $40 billion spent, $3,000 per Canadian family. Liberals say they're great deals. We say, show the deals. We say, let's produce the deals. And at first we have the NDP agreeing with us that these deals should be produced. Well, the Liberals are filibustering, trying to hide the deals. And then the NDP flip-flop and propose this ridiculous motion that says essentially this committee should do the work that a $5 bill could do on its own, with the help of a person submitting the request, I suppose.
Probably take 11 years.
And it might take 11 years. The committee can order it on any timeline. Right? The committee can order these documents right away. They can say within a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, whatever timeline the committee thinks appropriate, the committee can order that the documents be produced right away. And
And in both languages.
Exactly, yeah. We can order the documents right away in both languages. So we should do that. We should order these documents in order that they be made public. Now, but in an effort to find further compromise, in an effort to reason with the other side, my colleague, Mr. Perkins, has put forward a motion which which tries to find a middle way, which orders the full production of the documents with suggested redactions to then go to the parliamentary law clerk. And this is a procedure that has been used in the past as a compromise. And instead of even debating that motion, we had New Democrats and Liberals voting to adjourn debate on that motion. They did not even want to talk about our compromise proposal. So we'd be happy to talk further about options for how to make that for how to make this issue move forward. But the motion that the NDP have put forward is just a complete joke. The NDP are trying to cover up for their complicity in the liberal cover-up by putting forward a motion that pretends to ask for information that does not ask for any information that isn't already available through a $5 ATIP. And this underlines the NDP disregard for the real interests of workers, of taxpayers, and of all Canadians. Canadians paid for these deals. They deserve to know what's in them. If they're great deals, show your work. And Mr. Chair, I do have more to say on this, but I will. I'll conclude my remarks for now. If you can add me to the list to say a few more words on the amendment, but I do want to give a chance for other colleagues to weigh in on this. So please add me to the list, but I will. I'll leave my comments there for the moment.
Thanks. It's Mr. Sousa and then Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment that I'd like to move. It's now been submitted
Sorry,
to the
just
clerk.
to be clear, the amendment to Mr. Genoves's amendment to the original motion?
No, the amendment to the Mr. Massey's motion.
We're debating the Mr. Genoves's amendment, so it'd have to be a sub-amendment to Mr. Genoves's amendment.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Is that what your
I have
intent
nothing
is,
more to
or-
comment on Mr. Genoves's motion.
Okay. Mr. Massey, go ahead, please.
Withdraw, thanks.
Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can understand why government members are confused about whether this is an amendment, sub-amendment, sub-amendment to a motion that is about as clear as mud in the first place, although I think it was all done with the best intent to try and move us from the original spot of what we believe is the importance of true transparency, which is the release of the contracts completely publicly, and the government's desire to keep them completely secret, to hide something. They claim it's about confidentiality, but, you know, of all the government members that have circled through this committee since I've been on this debate, not one of them has read the Volkswagen contract. I have. And I'm the only one here that can speak with any clarity about what's in these contracts, because I've read them. And I can tell you, there's virtually nothing in them that is commercially sensitive, unless you find it politically disturbing that contracts don't contain clauses that guarantee Canadian jobs. Because I can tell you, the Volkswagen contract, I can tell you what's not in it. What's not in it is a clause that protects Canadian jobs, and that's a guarantee. I can also tell you what's in it. A clause that prohibits its release. There is no clause that prohibits its release. So what we're dealing with here is a legitimate attempt by the member from Windsor West to try and find a way out of complete the two sides of complete disclosure, where we were, where the Bloc Québécois were, where the NDP were, and the government's intransigence at trying to keep poorly negotiated contracts secret, because that's the real reason they're trying to keep them secret. They didn't negotiate a good contract, and they're being caught in those failures of both the Department of Industry and the Minister of Industry to read them, because if you can believe it, I've been actually questioning the Minister of Industry about a number of contracts that he's responsible for having signed. And recently, a few weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago in the Finance Committee, I was asking him about the contract on Stellantis and whether he had read it, and he said no. And I asked the Minister of Health in the Health Committee whether the Minister of Health had read the contract to procure vaccines from Medicago before he wrote a $150 million check from the taxpayer to pay for a contract that they essentially canceled. And he said it was an advance payment on vaccines that we didn't receive. But when I asked him if he had read the contract, he said no, he hadn't read the contract. So he wrote a $150 million check on behalf of taxpayers to the largest company in Japan based on not reading the contract. And the Minister of Industry said he hadn't read these contracts. Now, why would a corporate lawyer not read a contract? Now, he also said he didn't sign it. And fair enough, I guess he's got people for that. He's too important to actually read and sign a contract that is less than 30 pages. But sometime when he's flying around the world, I'm sure in his business class seat, he can find the time to read a 30-page contract, and I'd advise him to do so and take a look at these contracts. And he will not be scared if he reads them about releasing them, or maybe he will. But if he is, it's not because of all the commercially sensitive information that's in these contracts. It's because of what a poor contract the Liberal government negotiated and how they've been caught in it. And Mr. Massey's motion here, in an attempt to try and make it a little more legible and a little more transparent, my colleague, MP Genis, started with an amendment to the first paragraph, which starts at that, an order of production, and upon receipt, immediately post on its website. The idea that the most important thing we thought that the NDP cared about, along with the Bloc and ourselves, was transparency and that it would be made public. But that wasn't contained in Mr. Massey's motion, so we thought, well, in the spirit of consistency with the NDP and what they had said publicly and what their leader had said publicly in the House of Commons in question period, maybe it just slipped because we're all working hard this time of day, so we'd help the motion along and provide an improvement. Well, what we know was Mr. Massey's intent to actually have these contracts released publicly, because that's what he and his leader had said in the House of Commons. It's what Mr. Massey had said in this committee. So I'm sure that Mr. Massey has no objection to an addition to his motion that actually inserts what he had said we should do, which is release the contracts publicly. Now, in the confusing paragraph of F, we can debate whether it's new or not. That time will come, I guess, and we started to try and have that discussion earlier. But in that, I think MP Genis has made an amendment that helps actually make this a little more legible by, I'll leave the word new out, because that's a little confusing, but F said that the departments and agencies tasked with gathering these documents be redacted according to the Access to Information Act, with the exception that all companies must fully disclose and make publicly available to correct any misinformation the following. It was sort of sucking and blowing at the same time, that sentence. It's very confusing. It says, we're going to have them redacted in making them public and accessible, but let's redact them to correct misinformation. How do you correct misinformation if it's not public? So it's confusing. So Mr. Genis proposed to remove the words "and agencies tasked with gathering these documents by redacting according to the Access to Information Act, with the exception that all companies must." So it would read now that the departments fully disclose, an idea that the NDP clearly supported many times publicly, that the departments fully disclose and make publicly available the following. Much cleaner, much simpler way of what I think MP Massey was originally trying to get to in this, in his attempt to make a friendly or compromise motion. I think some of the language got muddled, so I think in a genuine attempt to ensure that Mr. Massey's motion is clear for all the public and for everyone, that we want this public, we want to make sure that Mr. Massey was expressing exactly what it was he had said in committee and what he had said in the House and what his leader had said, which is that these should be public. So that confusing back and forth redaction redaction this, redaction that, but make public, redaction, it's very confusing. So now we've cleaned it up so the thing is consistent with the words of Mr. Massey in the past. And item number 4 under F said the redacted versions. Again, very confusing because Mr. Massey had said he wanted these public, and that the intro line in F said redacted but make public. Well, we're just assuming that the NDP want to be consistent with what they've said publicly and that they're not changing their mind and flip-flopping. Or as I said in the last meeting, quoting Churchill, that they're ratting. You know, that's when a politician crosses the floor. In Britain, they call it ratting. Churchill said it was easy to rat, but it was really tough to re-rat. So we're having to make some cleaned up language here so that Mr. Massey doesn't have to re-rat, so that Mr. Massey can stay clean with his public statements, and the NDP can stay clean with the public statements that they want these contracts public for the transparency to ensure Canadian workers are protected. And isn't that the best way to ensure, with all the stories that have gone on out there, generated starting by the ambassador from South Korea in his meetings in Windsor, who said 1,600 foreign replacement workers were coming and they need to find houses? I'm sure, as everyone knows, many of us interact with diplomats all the time. I've not met a diplomat that's allowed to freelance, that's allowed to go out there and make these things up on their own.
Bob Ray.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess Bob Ray a bit on what's going on in the UN. Maybe not always been consistent with where the government is, apparently, in its flip-flop on Israel. But when you talk about the issue of consistency, I think it's important, and that the public expects that when we make a commitment, that we say we want to do something, like make contracts public, that we do. I, for the life of me, can't think of any reason, because I have read the Volkswagen contract, what they're afraid of. The contracts, as any well-negotiated contract have with the government, and I've read the Medicago contract, I've read the Volkswagen contract, have clauses, standard sort of government clause, on public release. Of course, when you deal with the government, when you deal with the federal government as a corporation, whether you're a domestic corporation or an international corporation, this is a very sophisticated global company, Stellantis. You know that when you're taking taxpayer money, if you're going to take taxpayer money, if you're going to vacuum up taxpayer money to pay the cost of assembling batteries, because that's what these contracts do. It's in the IRA, and the IRA, for those who don't know it, the many thousands who are watching this committee at Parleview, the IRA is President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. It's a bit misnomer, because when you spend $1 trillion, that's actually an Inflation Act. It's not an Inflation Reduction Act, but I digress, and I try not to do that. So when we have a contract that the minister and the parliamentary budget officer say mirror the Inflation Reduction Act, the Inflation Reduction Act is very public and very clear, including a congressional parliamentary budget officer estimate of what it will cost on the issue of battery assembly. And remember, this is about battery assembly. It's not about battery manufacturing. There's a lot of talk that we're protecting auto manufacturing jobs here. There isn't one auto manufacturing job being protected here. These are assembly jobs. These parts are made in China. And just ask the workers at the CAMI plant in Ontario that has been shut down. The only EV manufacturing plant in Canada has been shut down after only 6 months because they can't get the parts from, anyone can guess it? China. China doesn't have the parts, or they do have the parts and certainly won't give it to North American plants. So because that got shut down, we expect that the Chinese parts coming for the EV batteries to be assembled in Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Ford will somehow magically appear from China. But in this case, don't we want to have that transparency? If, as the government says, we're making this up, Liberals keep saying we're making this up. They have two excuses. One, they say we're making it up. I'm not, because I've read the contract, and the government members have not. Certainly, the former Kathleen Wynne finance minister who sits at this table has not read the contracts, but it doesn't stop him from talking about it. So in the case of these contracts, I would think that if we are wrong, the best thing you can do to prove us wrong is to release them. And won't we look foolish? Won't we look foolish if these contracts actually do contain a job guarantee for Canadians? Prove us wrong. Release them. My colleague, Mr. Jennis, in his motion, talked a bit about the last item on MP Massey's thing, which is, I find confusing too, item I. This is the one that says we're going to ask for these ultimately through an access to information request, or we're going to have the information commissioner look at it. If the information commissioner were looking at it, applying some sort of theory and saying, okay, this contract can be released publicly, and but the terms say you can't release these commercially sensitive things, and Stellantis has said, we believe those things are commercially sensitive, and the information commissioner agrees that those things are commercially insensitive, and they're just not a political game to hide failures of contract negotiations, and then they would be made public, then that would be great. And that's essentially the motion I proposed earlier today. It's a language cleaned up version of what MP Massey was asking for that makes it a little more legible and understandable. But it actually says, let's trust these officers. But this motion, I think, is trying to say, we don't trust them, so we'll actually get them in some sort of secret room and have a political debate with the cameras off about whether we agree or disagree, and whether the government wants to use the process in this committee to remove even more embarrassing clauses from the contract in order to be released. And Mr. Jennis spoke eloquently about the efficiency of the access to information process. And I know, for example, that far be it for me to say this is an abuse, but let me give you one example of the 112 access to information requests that my office filed this summer, thanks to my assistant, Graham O'Brien, who did amazing work to try and get some clarity and transparency from this government. I'll give you an example of 2 of the 112. I can get them to bring over all 112 and the responses just to give you a bit of clarity on this one aspect, and I will be speaking to the motion on it if I read all 112. And I think Graham, well, I mentioned Graham and he's left the room temporarily, but I'm sure he's gone to the office to get the 112 and the responses from the government. But just from memory, let me give you 2 examples of the great transparency of the industry department, which is the department that signed these contracts. So let's talk about that. I asked in an access to information request for the schedule of the Deputy Minister of Industry for the last 12 months. And I got a response back. I did get a response back, Mr. Jennis. It did come back within the time. But here's what it said. The 1 year of schedule that I asked for from the Deputy Minister of Industry would take 11 years for the department to produce. 11 years. Now, I'll remind you that Mr. O'Brien, who did all this great work in my office, he could be sent over to the Department of Innovation, Science, and Industry. So this doesn't give you a great deal of confidence that this department either can negotiate a good contract or actually understands what innovation science is, because that, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It was 8 years for the Deputy Minister. Sorry, I didn't mean to exaggerate. It was 8 years, Graham has reminded me, for the Deputy Minister. So that makes it better, because it was only 8 years to get his schedule. But Graham knows how to use Microsoft Outlook schedule. I think most of us do here. And you know, when you open up your day on the schedule, it says, if you hit up on the button File, up comes a drop-down menu. And guess what it says on that drop-down menu?
What does it say?
It says Print. It says Print. And so we tried that for a few days of my schedule. It took 5 seconds a day. 5 seconds to print out a single day. So I am making that offer right now to the Department of Industry, who can't negotiate good contracts with Stellantis because they can't figure out how to hit File Print on the Deputy Minister's schedule.
Shameful.
That Mr. O'Brien will come over and teach the Department of Innovation, Science, and Industry how to use File Print on the Outlook schedule. So, not to be outdone, the deputy minister is an important man, as we all know. He has an associate deputy minister who appears before the industry committee on just about everything we do. We asked for his schedule for a year too. We did. But clearly he's much more important than deputy minister. You know why? Because the error I made earlier when I said 11 years about the deputy and it's 8, while it was wrong, it was 8 for the deputy, but for his associate deputy, it was 11 years because he's a much more important man than the deputy. It would actually take another 3 more years to hit file print for all the days in his schedule. And I have to tell you, this is the department that MP Massey wants to rely on in Section I to release the contract and ATIP. That's a very, far be it for me, I might challenge it, but it would probably take 11 years. That may be a dilatory sort of thing that the Department of Industry is trying to hide. That the Department of Industry is actually trying to hide the deputy minister's schedule for some reason. They've made claims in C27 that they've had 300 meetings over the summer. It turns out they had about 300 meetings with the Canadian Marketing Association, the Canadian Bankers Association, but nobody who actually cares about privacy of individuals, just people who care about abusing an individual's privacy. So they're trying to hide things at every turn. And that's why we need the transparency of the amendments that Mr. Genuine put forward, or my genuine compromise motion that I put forward today, which has about 80 to 90% of MPs Massey's motion in it, just with the idea that let's have a third party review it, which is a compromise on our part, and have it released publicly. The only difference really, besides all the grammatical errors, is the issue of public or private release. And we trust parliamentary officers to release it and make those judgments. Apparently, the government doesn't. Wonder why. And now the NDP no longer trusts the officers of Parliament to make the decision and release things publicly. So, this is a production of documents motion. Or that's the intent of what we originally put forward. And MP Massey's version has some production of documents motion, but it actually asks for things that aren't documents. So I don't know that it actually qualifies, and I've not challenged the chair on whether or not this motion actually is acceptable under the rules, because it's not really a production of documents motion in the truest sense, because it's asking for things that are not the contract. It's asking for things like the number of foreign workers who are building plants involved in equipment installation technology transfer. Well, you know what? Why don't we just have Stellantis before the committee and ask them that? But I can tell you that is not part of the contract. The contract has employment stuff. It doesn't list out the foreign workers that they're bringing in. So it's asking for the production of a new document that does not exist. And there are ways to do that. The member could have asked and filed what's called an OPQ around here. And we're in Ottawa. Ottawa, like all governments, lives on acronyms. We're in the OGO committee, another acronym. I sit on the INDO committee. The industry department is called ISED. It actually doesn't bear any resemblance to the title of the minister. The minister is a Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, and the department is Industry, Science and Economic Development. They can't even get the title and the department straight and linked up, but yet we want to trust them that they're not hiding something and negotiating a good contract. So in the titles and in those issues, he's asking for a document that requires special production. And OPQ means order, paper, question. Members of Parliament can ask what's called an order paper question. The government is compelled in 45 days to respond to those order paper questions. And this is a perfect item, and I would recommend that MP Massey file an OPQ. You're allowed 4 at any given time. I've always got 4, but I actually am so curious about what the government's doing. I generally have 8 or 10 or 12 in at any given time, although you're only allowed 4, so other MPs have to sign them. And you find out quite interesting information. And the number of foreign workers who are building the plants involved in equipment and installation technology transfer, that's a number. Numbers are what OPQs are best to expose. So we don't need this here. In fact, that's not a document that is signed in the contract. So I think it should be asked under an OPQ. That's not production of documents. The number of temporary number two, the number of Canadian temporary construction jobs to be created and how many permanent production positions are to be created as part of the contract guarantees. Well, the minister has said quite clearly publicly, as has the Prime Minister, there are 2,500 permanent jobs. So they don't need to produce a document for that unless for some reason MP Massey doesn't trust that even that number is correct because it says 2,500 jobs. That's the answer to the number of permanent production positions created as part of the contract. That's 25, 2,300. We've heard a couple of different numbers. 25, 2,300. It's close. So they've said, excuse me, they've said both of those. So we don't need a motion to ask for that unless we don't believe the minister that that's even in the contract. I trust the minister that when he said that there would be 2,300 permanent jobs in the contract, that that's what they'll be. The minister just hasn't said that they're Canadian. Or at least the company has said they're not all Canadian. The minister has said they're Canadian, they're not Canadian. Some of them are Canadian. A small portion are now in there. While I really don't want you to know because I won't release the contract. So maybe MP Massey has a point. Maybe we can't even trust that number that the minister has put out. But again, that would make a classic OPQ question. A classic OPQ question. It's just a straight number. In fact, item 1 and 2 could be, wait for it, in the same OPQ question. And they would have to respond in 45 days. Item 3, the steps that will be taken to prioritize the employment of Canadians for building plants and equipment. Again, the release of the contract, if it says these jobs have to be Canadian, would say that in the contract. But it isn't listed there. No contract that I've ever seen, and I was in large corporate businesses for 25 plus years. I ran them. I was on boards of directors on them, publicly traded companies, private companies. And you don't outline in a contract all the steps you take. Number 1, let's post an ad. Number 2, here's the qualifications. Number 3, let's do the interviews at this date. Number 4, let's interview the people. Number 5, here's how we'll score them. You don't put the steps that will be taken to prioritize the employment. Oh, are they Canadian or that? That's not, those steps on that hiring are not in a contract. It just says you're going to hire so many people to do so many things, and either they're Canadian or they're not. And one would expect that if you're putting, in this case, $15 billion, the largest corporate subsidy in the history of Canada for a single company for a 6-year period, $1,000 of taxes per household in Canada, that you would put that requirement in the contract. So I think, again, that could be an OPQ question, very simply an OPQ question, but it's not a production documents question because that wouldn't be in the contract. You could have put the construction schedule of the plant. That's in one of these contracts. There are 2 contracts for each of these. You could put that in the contract. You could ask for the steps of the construction schedule. That would be a legitimate element of the production of documents. But that it not be, it wouldn't be the step to be taken to prioritize employment, other than saying, I think what MP Massey's saying, and I think he generally is, does it say you have to hire Canadians? If it does, release those clauses. MP Massey didn't ask for those clauses to be released. It's this liberalized, bureaucratized language that says prioritize the employment of Canadians. Sounds like people who write acronyms that wrote this up. Number 4, they should be deposited with the clerk of the committee within, I got 1 blocked out, 3 weeks. I don't know if that's an old strikeout or not, but the redacted versions, and this again is where we had some confusion, and maybe it's a typo that we're trying to fix that's in the in the motion because MP Massey had said many times in industry committee and in this committee that he wanted in public, and so did his leader in the House. He actually questioned quite emotionally the Prime Minister on this issue and the Minister of Industry calling for the release of the contract. So I'm thinking that was probably a typo in the rush to get this done, and that's why in all good spirit of assistance, MP Genuis has offered to help out to make sure that the motion is clearly consistent with the public position of the NDP. Number 5, the information related to above specific areas not available in the contract be provided by the above-mentioned companies to the committee in writing. So here we go, the cone of silence. Now, there is a bit of gray hair around this table, but some people here may not remember, and some may, that classic TV series. I was a tiny little kid, I must admit it, called Get Smart. Do you remember Get Smart? There isn't much Get Smart in this contract, but Get Smart, where they had the cone of silence, and Max would go in, and they'd have something secret to talk about, the chief, and the cone of silence would come down over them, and they tried to talk to each other through the cone of silence, and they could never hear anybody. That was the cone of silence. This is the cone of silence clause here that MP Massey has put in. The cone of silence. You know what happens when you put a cone of silence into this committee in Ogo and looking at the contracts? The same thing that happened to Max and the chief in Get Smart. It doesn't work. It doesn't provide transparency. Nobody can hear the contract. Nobody can see it. Nobody can prove it. It ties the members' hands to secrecy. And that's the goal of the Liberals, is to tie our hands to secrecy. And the only reason to do that is because they're hiding something. If they were proud of this contract as they claim they are, I've heard the Liberal members go on at length about the pride of these contracts. I've heard them and seen them do media, the pride of these contracts. Well, if you're proud of these contracts, release them. But obviously you're not proud of the contracts, you're just proud of the rhetoric. If you were proud of the contracts, you'd release them. Now that my assistant Graham O'Brien is back, I'd like to thank him again for all the work he did on exposing the secret society of industry who has decided that access to information doesn't apply to them and that it will take 11 years to produce a file print copy of the Deputy Minister and the Associate Deputy Minister's schedules, Mr. Shen. And I would like to thank him for that work. And I think I just have to make sure that Graham, did you go back to the office to get the other 110 access to information request responses? I could really use them here because I know the committee members would be fascinated on Section I on producing access to information as the way to get this contract, just to give examples of how effective access to information is at getting secret government documents when the government doesn't want to do it. So, Graham, maybe you could send, we have a couple of part-time students, maybe just give them a call, ask them if they'll come over with them and bring them over. I think it may require a wheelbarrow to bring them over, but I'm prepared in the aura of transparency to demonstrate to this committee and just how many access to information requests the Liberal government treats with a great deal of openness and respect in putting things forward. So I can tell you that I think the intent is right by Mr. Massey. I think he made some typos here that Mr. Genuis is trying to fix in an earnest way, as my colleague always is, an earnest way in trying to fix the motion. And I'd like to make two more corrections if I could, a sub-amendment to Mr. Genuis's motion, if that would be okay.
Seems right.
The chair proposed at the beginning of this meeting to clean up some of the language. So I would like to propose.
Before you start, do you have a copy for me or for the clerk?
Well, I'm just going to repeat the one that you just gave at the beginning. So you probably already have a copy of it, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move that the word new before the motion, beside number F, be removed. Be removed. I think it should be removed because it's no longer new. It's been talked about now for a couple of meetings. And it actually doesn't read well because if I read it right now, it says these documents received by the clerk, new, F, the departments. It just doesn't work. So I move that the word new be removed. And I'm having trouble following all of the crossed out and the things that are in it. So in item H, the word immediately for some reason is struck out, but I don't recall us striking that out, and I don't know which version it is. So I would add to that same motion, as the chair had pointed out earlier, that we return the word immediately to the motion, to the motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Sorry, is the immediately in or out?
I would propose to
No,
put back in.
let's go back. The new, I tried to take out the new and the immediately, and there was another one. No, there's the word one somewhere. But the new F and the immediately, I am advised, were not part of Mr. Genuis's amendment, so we can't move a sub-amendment to it.
Amendment to the amendment?
Not on this, because I'm told by the clerk that new as a new F and the striking the immediately was not part of Mr. Genuis's. So
Sure, I'd like to challenge your ruling on that.
Okay. Won't take it personally. Just a second, and we'll get our tracking chart out. Well, note this was your Christmas card. I'm now withdrawing it.
I'll challenge that as well,
I
Chair.
am a vindictive chair.
So the question is whether or not the sub-amendment is in order?
Is it saying the chair, yes or no?
So it's, yep. So challenge the chair, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? The chair's decision being that the sub-amendment is not in order. So shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Mr. Juari?
Yes.
Mr. Pulowski?
You're asking the challenge of this chair, so
Shall-
you're asking me whether I support the decision of the chair?
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? The chair's
I
decision being that the
sustain-
sub-amendment is
I
out
vote
of
to
order.
sustain the decision of the chair.
Okay. Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmierczyk?
Unlike my opposition colleagues, I like the chair, and I will sustain,
Oh,
will sustain
take
his,
that back.
his ruling.
Take that back.
Mr. Souza?
I just dropped 5 points.
Yeah. I support the chair as well, yes.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Block?
I sustain.
Mr. Jenis?
Yeah. I also like the chair, but I'm pleased to be part of a party where we're not just a bunch of trained seals. We can think independently and have our own opinions, and you can like someone while still disagreeing with them occasionally. So I will vote nay on the chair.
Mr. Perkins?
Hurts.
Having a lot of commercial fishermen in my riding, and I'm not a fan of seals who are eating up all our commercial fishery. So I'm very appalled when I see seals, so I will be voting against the chair.
Madame Vignola?
Je vote pour la décision du président.
I'm in favor.
Mr. Massey?
Yes, it is embarrassing the Conservatives couldn't even submit a proper sub-amendment despite all their vigor.
Eight yeas, 2 nays.
Hey, your sub-amendment is out of order, but you still have the floor, Mr. Perkins.
That's great. How are we doing on those? Oh, Graham's left. He's gone to get the other 110 information, access to information. ATIPs are called. Another acronym here. Another acronym, ATIP. ATIP. So let's talk about why, because this is the heart of what Mr. Genuis is trying to do, and I appreciate MP's Massey's very humorous comment about my attempt to do a sub-amendment. I take it in the spirit with which he and I always kibitz on. So the spirit of the motion, the amendment to Mr. Massey's motion, is transparency. And transparency is what we want to have, and we thought we all wanted to have. Certainly when this Liberal government was elected with their Sunny Ways slogan in 2015, they made a lot of commitments about government transparency. This would be the most transparent government in the history of the country, that they would ensure that committee business would be not influenced by parliamentary secretaries, that the committees would be more independent, and they would ensure that we would have open access through access to information and better access to information laws and more open and transparent government. But after 8 years, it appears that the transparency that they like and the transparency that they're protecting is a transparency that only matters when it suits their political means, and when it harms their political means, they will use every trick in the book to try and stop that transparency. So why is it? Why is it that they would do that? Well, you know, at the launch of these contracts, the Prime Minister said, and I'm just getting it here, he said that this would create lots of local construction jobs in Southwest Ontario, thousands in fact, and it would create lots of local jobs when it comes to the permanent jobs, that this would be, as they called it, the saving of the 100,000 jobs in the auto business that we have in Ontario. And right now, the average cost to save those 3,000 jobs in total in one plant, so total in all of them, is about $5 million a job. And you know, job creating and the important auto pact, the evolution from the auto pact through to the protection of the auto industry and the open markets through the free trade agreement in the United States with the United States passed in 1989, to the further North American Free Trade Agreement, which integrated and guaranteed good union paying auto jobs in Canada as part of the Mexico-Canada-United States relationship on auto production. And I'd say that not only has it produced good jobs, a good stable industry, but it's also produced the best cars in the world. And the government now is engaged in an exercise of catch-up. Not ketchup like you put on your hamburger, but catch up. They're catching up to the IRA, where President Biden caught them flat-footed and said, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to impose a carbon tax in Canada, or in the United States like Canada does. That would be foolish because a carbon tax doesn't work. What we're going to do is we're going to invest in technology, not taxes. What an idea. Let's invest in technology and not taxes. So they use something called ITCs, more acronyms, and PTCs, more acronyms. ITCs are called input tax credits, and PTCs are called production tax credits. In other words, government tax breaks to companies that do certain things. And in the IRA, they've put in this clause that said if you assemble EV batteries in the United States to go into EV vehicles assembled in the United States, that you will have a massive subsidy for the next little while. And here's what the IRA says about that subsidy. It's something I guess they don't want us to see in these contracts, whether or not these contracts actually do what they say on this. But the IRA says that between now and the year 2029, 100% of the cost of assembling those batteries will be covered by the taxpayer, 100%. Now, if you're a global company out of Germany or Korea, Who wouldn't sign up for that deal? Because you know what? An EV battery is 40% of the cost of the car. So the United States says, no problem, we'll subsidize 40% of the production of the car to the manufacturer, immediately increasing the profitability massively of these expensive vehicles. But since there isn't a market for them, because nobody will pay the retail price of those cars, we'll subsidize the cars on the other end too. So we'll give the consumer a $7,500 a car subsidy. So we're taking a car, if you can believe this, folks, we're taking a car that will sell for $50,000, and we're saying that 40% of that cost, and through 2029, to build that car, the taxpayer will pay for, but the Stellantis, Ford, and Volkswagen will make the profit, 100% profit off that. And then we're going to further subsidize $7,500. So you're talking about, you know, potentially a $25,000 to $30,000 taxpayer subsidy on the cost of a $50,000 vehicle. And the Trudeau government says, sign me up. I think that's a good deal. I'm busy shutting down the resource industries that drive our economy, pay for our health care, pay for everything and the growth that we have. Our greatest global competitive advantage is our natural resources, our oil and gas, our forests, our minerals, our mines, our fisheries, our agriculture, our renewable resources. We're busy shutting all of those things down on an extreme agenda. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace it with an industry of central planning, of state capitalism, where the state actually subsidizes private sector companies, not private capital. And that's what the IRA does in the extreme in this case. But you know what? The United States government's not out there hawking that thing very much. The Congressional Budget Officer said this is going to cost $30, $40 billion out of it. Well, he was clearly underestimating it, because in Canada we're already spending with 3 plants over $40 billion on 3 assembly plants. And if you're going to do that, and if you're going to push forward the idea that somehow 100% subsidy on batteries through 2029, and then, by the way, the IRA says in the year after that, I meandered a bit. The IRA after that on the 100% in 2029 goes to 75%, and then in the next year it goes to 50%, and then the next year it goes to 25%. Over those years, that's the percentage of the taxpayer is going to pay and cover in the cost of the batteries in the IRA. That's supposedly what's in these contracts, because the minister has said they're the same as the IRA. Love to see that publicly. I'm sure the public would like to see that we're 100% subsidizing Volkswagen, so that Volkswagen has an increase in profitability in the cars they sell by 40%. 100%, 75%, all that. And then in 2033, there is no subsidy. At least that's when the IRA part of this ends, if it doesn't extend. But we know that the minister has said publicly, if the U.S. Congress extends the IRA, then they'll extend the subsidy. So we can expect that that's in the contract. So these are really jobs that won't exist unless there is $1,000 a household per manufacturer subsidy. And I have to tell you, the people in my riding, as much as they love the auto jobs, are not keen that $1,000 of their tax dollar for Volkswagen, which has more revenue than the government of Canada, that another $1,000 of their taxpayer money for Stellantis is covered, which has more annual revenue than the government of Canada, that we're actually subsidizing companies that have more money than Canada. And the incredible part of this is that the NDP rail on against corporate profits. We hear it all the time in the House. Corporate profits are bad. Well, actually, corporate profits produce the phones that all the NDP use. The computers that they're logged on here are produced through corporate profits and the innovation that comes from it. But if corporate profits are bad, I'm left scratching the few hairs I have left on my head, about how that's consistent with taking these companies that are larger than the government of Canada and paying for 40% of the cost of the production of their vehicle, and they get 100% of the profit. Now, you'll say to me, Rick, yeah, but it's helpful because, you know, these cars will be sold in Canada. They'll help reduce our carbon footprint in Canada. You know what? You'd be wrong. And I know it's an assumption you would make, but do you know that Volkswagen does not have an assembly plant of either an internal combustion engine or an EV plant in this country? And you know how many plants they plan to build assembling EVs or internal combustion engines in Canada? I'm asking the members on the government side, please tell me, in all of this great work and negotiations and fine contract discussions you've done that you're trying to hide, how many commitments did you get to have a battery and then a car assembly plant from Volkswagen or Stellantis in Canada? I'm listening. Wow, they usually heckle me, but they're silent now. Because you know what the answer is? It's zero. It's zero, not a single plant. Now, prove me wrong. Release the contract. Maybe it's in the contract. But because of the silence, I suspect it's not. And you know why it's not? Because Volkswagen's already said where these batteries are going. You know where they're going? Come on, I know you're listening intently. I know the government members know where they're going. Help me out here. Help me out here. Where are they going? Oh, I know they're laughing. The camera won't show them. But where they're going is Tennessee. So they're going to get trucked EV batteries, heavy EV batteries for an EV Volkswagen car are going to be put in an 18-wheeler driven by diesel to Tennessee. Really helps the carbon footprint of developing that EV vehicle. And then the vehicles assembled in Tennessee. And guess where vehicles assembled in Tennessee are sold? Come on. Garnet, you must know where vehicles in Tennessee are sold. They're sold in the United States.
Exactly.
So the Canadian taxpayer is subsidizing vehicles to be sold in the United States. Now, sign me up for that deal, say the Liberals. I'll subsidize almost half the car. I'll give it to foreign multinationals so they can make more profit, and they're supported by their NDP coalition partner in this. Will increase the profitability of these foreign multinationals by almost 40% on each vehicle. We'll do that so that we can sell the cars in the United States. And you know what? To do file print on about 5 things. That looks obstructionist to me. I don't know about you. These seem like they don't want to share their schedules. They're hiding something, like they're hiding the contracts. Here's another one. Please provide emails, texts for from May 1st to September 30th in relationship to a single amendment. We made an amendment, CPC6, another acronym, but it was Conservative Party Amendment number 6, to Bill C-34, the bill that changed the Investment Canada Act, which is stalled in the Senate because the Liberals won't move it forward. C-34, we said, give us the emails and messages around that one single amendment between May 1st and September 30th of this year. Apparently, doing a search for the words C27 on email is a big task at the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Industry. There doesn't seem to be much industry there. That's 1,920 days to do that. This is the efficiency of the great abuse that government departments do on the Access to Information Act, of which Mr. Massey's depending on a clean and honest accounting of the contract from on behalf of the government. Here's another one, emails. Emails and messages with regard to our amendment CPC 5 on Bill C-34. Again, apparently doing CPC 5 in a search in emails will take 1,920 days. And it goes on. CPC 7 for that same bill, 1,920 days. Sense a pattern here? The pattern is obstruction, I believe. CPC 9. CPC 8. CPC 9 was 1,920 days. But apparently, wait for it, this is a good one. Emails regarding CPC 8, not 7, not 9, but CPC 8 for Bill C-34 for the same period of time, May 1st to September 30th. That one takes 1,400 days. Apparently, it's 500 days less to search for CPC 8 than it is for CPC 7 or CPC 9. So in order to determine that, they must have done some sort of search. They must have done some sort of search to say that somehow that's 500 days less. 500 days less. The Department of Innovation to do a search on their IT's program. Maybe the people that designed the pay system, Phoenix, for this government are answering these access to information requests. Another one here. From May 1st to September 30th, Mr. Massey's asking for access to information to play a role in this, and here's how effective access to information is. We asked for emails from May 1st to September 30th of this year from Jameson McKay, Director General, Strategy and Innovation Policy, in reference to C-34. So you'd think a strategy guy, a Director General, for those who don't know, who are watching, you know, you sort of have these policy people, then you have this hierarchy of directors or the bosses of policy people, and then you have everything in government is you get paid by how many people you manage. So the higher up you get, the more pay you get. So of course, there's a Director General above a director. So the Director General manages a lot of directors. And that gives him more pay. This guy's a Director General. Above a Director General is something called an Assistant Deputy Minister. There's a whole whack of Assistant Deputy Ministers above these Director Generals. And those folks all report to a Deputy Minister. That's the hierarchy for all those who are going on. So just so you know, the Director General of Strategy and Innovation apparently has difficulty doing search on his emails for 6 months that says the words C-34. It's a big bill that amends an important act, the act that deals with foreign investment into Canada and whether or not the Chinese continue to allow to buy everything up in Canada or not from China, Beijing-based companies, the ownership. This guy's a big player in developing that act. We asked for his emails on that. Apparently it's complicated. It's complicated. There was a movie called that once, but then I'll go there another time. It's complicated. 2,960 days to do a search and print the emails. Must be an awful lot of paper, but I would think, you know, the government members, Mr. Souza, I think if I went to Mr. Souza's email and said, I want you to organize his emails, the sent side of emails, you know how you go into Outlook and you can go to inbox and you can see what's come in and you can see the sent items. You go to the sent item one. It's not complicated. You go to the sent item one and you search Bill C-34 and it organizes that way. And all the Bill C-34 emails come up for that time. And you can actually see them. But apparently that's a difficult thing for the Department of Innovation and Industry to do. Must be too much science in it for them to do that and then say, open it up, file, print. Open it up, file, print. Apparently, that's going to take 2,960 days. I venture to say that by the time they get all that done, many of us will be off to other jobs and other lives and maybe not even on this earth. But it takes the department that long. Well, look at this. Another one here. The respect that the Department of Industry has for freedom of information and transparency, for ensuring that Canadians get to see open and transparent government, the most transparent government that Sunny Ways Trudeau promised in 2015, says here, in asking for emails and text messages with regard to CPC 1. Now, CPC 1 was an important amendment that got through it. Actually, I believe CPC 1. We post so many good amendments, 15 good amendments. This is one of the ones that the Liberals voted against, unfortunately, and it didn't pass. So in understanding why the government seals voted against it, we needed to see what the department bureaucrats told them was wrong with it. Because those are secret memos, apparently. And apparently, the government's trying to hide the reasons. Much like this contract, the government's trying to hide the reasons why they want this motion that we put forward to amend the Investment Canada Act defeated. Because that, again, would take, no, it wouldn't take 2,959 days, a slightly different number than the last one. It wouldn't take 2,961 days, a separate number. For some reason, it's the exact same amount of time, 2,960 days. The Phoenix pay system at work here on openness and transparency under these Liberals that Mr. Massey wants to depend on for the release of the contract. Mr. Massey's been in this place a long time. I believe Mr. Massey since 2004. Did I get that right? 2002. Thank you, Mr. Massey.
I was in high school.
2002. I got to tell you, that's an impressive public service and an impressive amount of winning elections by MP Massey. But I got to say, I suspect even for somebody with the patience of Job like he has, of having been in this place for so long, that 2,960 days to release the reasons why the department didn't want that amendment to the bill that Mr. Massey was present on, a very important bill, and Mr. Massey did very good work on it with us in that committee. He wouldn't want to wait that long to find out why that important one was defeated. Mr. Massey, we should probably do some access to information on the reasons why they voted against your amendment, the government, in there. And you would think that the voting against your amendments would motivate you to want to make sure that there was more openness and transparency here. But apparently we've got a problem here again on the ability of access to information to work. We asked again for the emails and memos and texts from someone named Mehmet. Sorry, Mehmet, if I pronounced your name wrong, Carmen. Now, Carmen is a senior policy analyst. Remember when I talked a minute ago that there were policy folks and then directors and then director generals and then ADMs and then DMs and then the elected minister over them, and then that's the hierarchy of government? Well, he's one of these policy analysts that would have worked quite a bit on the meat, on the details of this stuff. Am I? How can you tell? I have so much hair. So we asked him for his emails and mentions made of him in the drafting of Bill C-34, the Investment Canada Act. Now, just to shake it up a little, I think, in analyzing these access to information requests, the creativity and the innovation department comes through in their response on this one. Because instead of saying like they have in the past number, 2,960 days, they became very creative on this one and said 2,440 days. So file, print, memo, sort, sent. Apparently it's a difficult thing in innovation, Maybe the government screening doesn't allow them to go on YouTube. I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. If they can go on YouTube, at least they could do it at home, because I know they're dedicated public servants. They could go at home and they could Google it on YouTube on their home computer if they wanted to see how do I print an email on Outlook if they don't have an IT department in the Innovation and Industry Department. But like I say, I'm a generous fellow, and I've got an excellent staff, and I can send 23-year-old Graham O'Brien over in between working on my legislative stuff and the master's degree that he's taking right now at the same time. He's a very talented man, that he's doing all of that. I will allow him, because he does have a government, he does get paid by the House of Commons. I will allow him during the day, during question period, that's the only time. During question period, I'll allow him to go over to the industry department and show them, and maybe the government members could organize this meeting. Perhaps I should ask the minister too. Maybe he'd be willing to sit in on the meeting, and he'll do a tutorial to the department about how to hit file print. File print. It's a difficult thing. Pro tip here, file print. 2,440 days, very creative. But that's where the creativity ended, because on the next one that we asked for, we said that the emails, memos, and texts with regard to CPC Amendment 2. Now remember, some of these CPC amendments had 2,690 days, had something else. But apparently, when they were running through this through their AI machine on how they're going to respond to this, they didn't tell the AI machine when we submitted them in an order to actually vary up the days to make it look like they put some creativity and thought into this, that they actually put some work into finding out whether or not this could be done in a meaningful, open, and transparent way, as Mr. Massey wishes for in this memo, and as apparently government members support, since they skipped over my motion. I guess they were offended by my motion. It's unfortunate. They must have been offended by my motion, since my motion at the beginning of this meeting. And all of this, and I know how fascinating you're finding these access to information requests, but all of this could have been avoided if we were debating my motion now and you didn't skip over it. And I know the government members were afraid of my motion because it said, let the parliamentary law clerk determine what can be released and what can't. Not government officials who clearly are very open and transparent. Not government members who have been saying, when they haven't read the contract, when the Minister of Industry said he never read this contract on Stellantis, when the Minister of Health said he never read the Medicago contract before writing a $150 million check to the largest company in Japan, claiming it required an advance payment. And guess what? I read the contract. I did. I read the contract. In fact, I have it here now, if you want to see it. Graham has it with him, because Graham is a diligent staffer. He always comes prepared. And that contract does not have an advance payment clause, as the minister claimed before committee. But then, how would the minister know, as Minister of Health? Because the previous Minister of Health actually negotiated the contract. But when I asked him if he had read the contract, he said no. So perhaps that's why he didn't know it existed. But when I asked him and told him that the advance payment clause wasn't in that contract, he turned to his deputy minister, one of these fellas that we see from the industry department. He turned to his deputy minister and said, is he right?
Point of order.
And so,
Sorry, Mr. Perkins, we have a point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Sousa.
I just want clarity. Are you talking about the contract that you're not allowed to speak about?
I'm talking about the contract.
But you're releasing information on that
I
contract?
haven't released any information on the
It's
contract.
not a,
I haven't released any information on the contract.
thanks for clarifying.
I've
Go
released
ahead, Mr.
information
Perkins.
that the minister in a public committee said he hadn't read the contract and wrote a $150 million check to the largest company in Japan without reading the contract. A contract that doesn't contain what he claimed it contained. Take another look. If you had access to it, take a look. You can look for that clause. I challenge you to look for it. Please enlighten me with the clause. Just with the clause number. Just the clause number. Okay. So when they don't read the contracts, they're not actually doing their work. I'm not asking them to get in the room and negotiate. They've got thousands and thousands of bureaucrats, but I would think that they would actually read the contract before the minister put his signature on it. Maybe he didn't put his signature on it. Maybe it went to the auto pen. You know, auto pen. There's a mechanism in each minister's office where a mechanical arm can write the minister's signature. Shouldn't be done in a contract. That's actually illegal, but it happens. Another insider tip, it happens. And a lot of the letters you may get back from a minister never saw. It went on a mechanical arm. So maybe